Welcome, Commanders. My name is Commander Hobbs, and I am very excited to bring you this second Flight Assist Off training video. If you haven't gotten a chance to check out the first video yet, please do so. I've linked it into the description below. As I mentioned in the last video, I view training for Flight Assist Off, at least in the beginner level, with 5 different categories or proficiency levels. Last video was proficiency level 1. We covered basic exercises and some basic concepts that you'll kind of want to have loaded into your brain when you're flying with Flight Assist Off. This level is proficiency level 2, and we'll go all the way up to 5, and then we'll transition to some intermediate concepts, and eventually we'll get into advanced concepts, which I'm really excited about because I'm going to bring some other commanders on to talk about the way that they fly and some specific exercises that they use. One last note about the previous video. I just want to say how appreciative I am that you guys commented so much and liked it and gave me feedback, and it's really a great feeling. You know, I am someone who enjoys analyzing how people's minds work and how my own mind works, and then how to get to a certain skill set, right? So I love that analyzation. I love breaking things down and writing them out and categorizing things and all of these other things, right? That's me. So when I put the video out last week, I was just kind of expecting a good response, but I mean, I was expecting a couple things here and there, and you guys just completely overwhelmed me, and I just wanted to say thank you so much, and I'm really excited about future videos. So before we begin, I just want to remind you of those 2 key concepts from the last video, and those 2 concepts were use minimal input rather than overcorrecting, right? You're going to use little tiny movements on your stick, your throttle, your strafes to achieve what you want. And number 2, be aware of your speed and know your vector at all times. Those 2 key concepts need to be loaded in. They need to be plugged into your brain at all times when you're flying Flight Assist Off. As soon as you undock, they have got to be activated. Because if you don't have them activated, you either won't know where you're going necessarily, or you'll be surprised at the result, or you will be put into some chaotic flight state, which will cause this spiral of events. So please keep those 2 concepts loaded in your mind, and let's go ahead and begin. Welcome to Proficiency 2. I'm so happy that you're here, and I hope that you're happy to be here. We're going to start today with a quick conceptual lesson, and then we're going to move into the exercises. And the exercises for Proficiency 2 are actually really fun exercises because they're in some cool locations, as you might have noticed from the intro video that you just saw. And they're things that you're going to want to come back and do with other ships that you get when you get engineering upgrades, and you'll just want to come back and do them because they're going to help you out and identify issues that you might have at any given time during your career, and you can work on them there. So for the conceptual lesson, what am I talking about? So I'm talking about the function that your nose performs. So if you remember, in the last video we were talking about divorcing yourself from the idea that what's in front of you is the direction that you're going. That is absolutely not the case in Flight Assist Off. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, what's in front of you is not your vector. It's not where you're going. As Flight Assist Off pilots, we use that to our advantage. That we monopolize on it. That's our bread and butter. So when I'm talking about what functions the nose performs, I'm talking about when you point towards a certain thing in space, when you point your vision, your nose, the nose of your craft, towards something specifically, what function should that be performing? Why are you doing it? What's the reasoning behind it? Because the reasoning behind that action is different between Flight Assist On and Flight Assist Off, and the restrictions and the assumptions are different in each. For the purpose of this training, the nose in FAOFF performs 3 basic tasks and 1 complex task. So the 3 basic tasks you can see right now. The first one is visual confirmation. So that is when your ship needs to point somewhere to actually see it, right? Because you need to be able to see it out your front window. We don't have the luxury of being able to look behind us in Elite or straight down because we would just see our flight suit, right? We can kind of look to the left, kind of look to the right and up, and sometimes 45 degrees down if you're in an asp or something like that. But really, we have to turn to look at something and gain visual confirmation. So that's the first one. The second one has to do with weapons. I call it hardpoint volley. It's basically if you're running fixed and gimbaled weapons, like the vast majority of us are to some extent, you need to point your nose to it to be able to acquire a lock on that weapon or to be able to fire it or hit with the weapon. So hardpoint volley is absolutely dependent on your nose position. You'd have your nose faced a certain way to be able to fire at something. The third and final basic task that the nose performs is sensor acquisition. So you need to be pointed at something in order to acquire a kill warrant on it, or acquire a base wanted level. In front of your ship is an invisible cone. It has a very specific angle. You can change that through the class that you buy, a sensor, or through engineering, of course. But you basically need to point your nose at something to some degree in order to acquire it on the sensor. The complex task that the nose performs is what I call boost vectoring. That is actually not as dependent on your nose position as you might think when you're flying flight assist off. Actually, not really even when you're flying flight assist on, because you can do a lot of things with your strafes. But we're going to get to that piece later and why that's different. The main thing that I want you to think about right now is one that's missing from the basic task list. So what is it? What's missing? What would most people put in there as a function of the nose? The primary thruster, right? Most people would say the primary thruster is a function of the nose. You need to face a certain way to be able to use the primary thruster to start in that direction, or to achieve a goal, to reach that destination, right? To get closer to that ship, or to begin docking procedures, or etc. So what is this all about? What am I trying to get across to you? I want you to throw that concept that the basic function of the nose, that one of the basic functions of the nose is the primary thruster. I want you to throw it out the window, and I don't want you to take it up again until we get to Proficiency 4, when we'll revisit what actually is the primary thruster. What is its function in flight assist off? When we are born into Elite as flight assist on pilots, we are taught that the primary thruster is our means of travel in supercruise travel. We're taught to depend on it, heavily depend on that thruster. And what I want you to consider is that the primary thruster, for the purpose of this training and especially for the next training, Proficiency 3, is no different to you than your strafes. I want you to think of it as one of your strafe engines. So why is this a critical part to the training here? Number one, we're trying to break a bad habit, a habit that will cause you to use the primary thruster in FAOFF when you really shouldn't, or you don't need to, or when it's not as efficient as something else that you could be doing. Number two, because we want to give you more fluency, we want to develop your fluency with your other thrusters. You need to work more with the other thrusters because we're so dependent when we first come into the game on that primary thruster. You don't need to shut it off completely and not use it, especially for this exercise. But what I want you to do is I want you to consider thinking about it as a normal strafe thruster. I want you to think of it as nothing different than one of those thrusters. Don't think of it as this powerhouse that's beneath you that throws you forward into the blackness of space. We're going to get rid of that concept for a little bit. When we hit Proficiency 4, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about it again. We're going to bring it back into the mix, and we're going to talk about exactly what it is for flight assist off. How is it different? How is it used? How do we intelligently use it instead of using it as the dependency that we've used it as for so long? So this week and the next week, please do some self-check, especially if you're practicing with flight assist off. Start to question why your nose is pointed there. Are you just pointed in a certain direction because your vector is that direction and you're comfortable doing that? Are you missing efficient ways to do things because that nose is stuck where it doesn't necessarily need to be, because your vector is already established? So, and we're going to go over some exercises, a lot of exercises in the next proficiency level, but I just want to plant that little seed and to get you thinking about that, and then we'll cover it more in the next one. Okay, thank you so much for sticking with me through that brief conceptual lesson. It wasn't that brief, I do apologize. I promise that it will pay off in the future. Remember, just, don't turn it off, right? Just think of it differently. Think of it as an equivalent to your strafes that you're going to be working with. And this, we're going to do a bunch of lessons in Proficiency 3 that are focused exactly on this. And in fact, I'm going to shut off your primary thruster a little bit in Proficiency 3. So it'll be fun. And then Proficiency 4, we can bring it all together. And then Proficiency 5, you'll be ready to go. So thanks for sticking with me, and let's get on to the exercises. So one of the reasons why I absolutely love Proficiency 2 is because we get to work in some really cool environments and we get to do some really cool drills. What are we looking at here? Well, what we are looking at is our personal playground as FAOFF pilots. This is one of many playgrounds, actually. This is at SANTU, S-A-N-T-U. It is a CQC asset that was added into the game a while back. There are a bunch of these. There's actually a bunch of non-CQC assets as well, including the new generation ships that you can find. You can find a listing of these in the description below. I'll put a link up. That planet also we'll be using. That is a low-gravity planet. Perfect location for us. So take another ship to SANTU, dock at the station, grab a stock Sidewinder, and come to the scientific installation that should be on your scanner. Of course, after you do the exercises here in a stock Sidewinder, feel free to come back in another type of ship. There's a lot of different ships that you can run through this. It's a great facility, and please, please, please use it to familiarize yourself with your ship more. So what are we going to be doing today? We are going to be working with these tunnels. This one, there's several different types of tunnels here at the installation. This one is the Han Solo tunnel, I call it, because you have to turn each way. Each time that you go through, you have to kind of alternate 90 degrees. We're not going to necessarily start this one with the training. I'm going to show you one in a second that I want you to start with, but I want to give you an example of what we're working up towards. Okay? So we're going to try to go through these slowly, right, at first. We are not going to want to touch the edge of the tunnel, obviously. And as always, feel free to use your head look to actually get your orientation. So that is what we're going to be working on first. There's a bunch of different types of tunnels that we're going to be working on, including some curved ones, some straight ones, and some ones with obstacles inside, and all kinds of fun stuff. It's a lot of fun. You can do these with a lot of different types of ships too. You'd be surprised what you can fit in there. This is really marking your first trench exercise. So this is working up to trenches, which we're going to be doing in 4, some in 3, possibly. We might do some in 3. Sometimes I do it in 3 in the next video. But we'll be working up to some of your trench exercises and your control with a static object. So this thing is not turning, right? There's nothing turning about this facility. It's just static. It's sitting here. So as I said, it's not rotating, and that allows us to get a couple of really cool isolated metrics. We can measure how fast you can perform a round trip on any of these tunnels. We can measure at what speed are you hitting the wall, so where is the point of breakdown. We can also monitor your slipping, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The first kind of tunnel I want you to work with is this one in front of me. There's a bunch of these. There are no obstacles in them, and I want you to go through it slowly at 2 pips. What you're concentrating here on is keeping as close to the center as you can and making the smallest adjustments you can. And of course, since we're just on a vector and we're on flight assist off, we can turn at will and pivot at will, and it's not going to change our vector. So turn around and go back in. Our goal in this is to slowly increase our speed. We're going to increment our speed a little bit as we go through to try to get it faster and faster and faster, and to maintain our accuracy. So if you notice that you're going too quickly to maintain the center, then decrease the speed a little bit and work at that level and do your round trips that way. You can actually do the round trips fluidly, as we'll see in a second, and that's how I want you to get it eventually. But if you have to stop and center right now, that's fine. So we're going to go 4 pips to engines on this run and take her through. So the next type of tunnel that we're going to be working with is a curved tunnel, and this actually leads into these usually lead into the first type of tunnel that I showed you with the slots, the Han Solo tunnel. Remember to take these as slow as you need to when you're first going through them. The point of this, again, is not to touch the side. When you first start out, you're going to notice a little bit of slipping, getting really close to the bottom or the edge. That's okay. We're going to work on that later. When you're doing these, you're eventually going to want to start linking tunnels together and coming up with your own routine. I was just mentioning the concept of slipping, and I want to kind of show you a little bit of what that is. A turn without slip is going to stay relatively close to the center. Conversely, a turn with a lot of slip is going to make you feel like you're continuing to go on that old vector. If you notice that the belly of your ship is getting really close to anything, like the ground, when you're turning, you're dealing with a lot of slip. But don't worry too much about that right now. What I want you to do is to just get through it at any speed that you're comfortable without touching the walls. So start to get used to how these tunnels are organized and which paths you might want to take to practice. One really nice thing about embracing the slips that are happening, or that might be happening with you, is that you can kind of play with your edges and play with the dimensions of your ships and how close you can get. And you can really create some nice fluid glides through some of these tunnels. Of course, one of the goals that we're working towards is speed. So with the straight tunnels, try to get it to 4 pips at almost full speed. As with any exercise that we go through, the important thing is to have fun and to really make it your own. So spend some time here, come back here often. You're going to find that you will be able to fine-tune your vectors a little bit more. You can see exactly where your craft is going without having to rely on space dust or assumptions. Remember that while speed is a focus of ours, we don't want to sacrifice too much accuracy for speed. So if you notice that you're hitting the walls quite a bit, or if you notice that you're just out of control, decrease your speed a little bit and try it again. I hope you have a lot of fun with those exercises. Next up is landing. A lot of people want to try landing first at a spinning starport, but I really recommend coming to a platform first with flight assist off. It just makes things a lot simpler because, at least for a learning environment, because we can remove some of the variables that we really don't care about right now for landing, like the slot and the spinning station. So come to a platform first, and we're going to go through a couple exercises, then we're going to go to a station and talk about that. Find a platform. You can use 2 pips to engines or 0 pips to engines, whichever you feel comfortable doing at this point. We're going to come right onto the platform straight away.
Landing gear deployed.
Our approach to this is going to be to line up with the number. So pretend like the number is what you've done with the station tethering exercise. You're just going to keep it in your view around the same position. You're going to slowly float towards it, and it's going to disappear. Once it disappears, you're going to give a little down thrust, and you're going to let off immediately. Really quick down thrust, and just let it go down on its own. When you get to the pad, you're going to have to make some adjustments. Make small adjustments. Continue coming down. And land. Once you start to get more comfortable with this, what we're going to do is come in a little bit faster, and we're going to try some different angles out. Just a quick note, I do suggest getting comfortable with the first approach before you start trying some of these different approach angles. Start making that approach angle lower and lower each time. The more you experiment with creative ways to land, the more your training will pay off.
Landing gear deployed.
Sometimes the most difficult thing about landing is just not getting frustrated and keeping focused and keeping calm. That is even more so if you have a really sensitive ship. This is my combat Imperial Eagle, not my racing one, but even so, it's quite sensitive.
Landing coupler disengaged. You are clear to leave.
I want to talk about the slot for a second. If you come in really slow to the slot, or if you go out really slow, you are going to experience kind of a gravitational anomaly effect. This is because at the slot is the point where the station's artificial gravity takes over. I know it's weird, you wouldn't think it would exist that way, but it does. For this reason, it's actually a little bit easier when you're learning with flight assist off inside of a station like this to come in a little bit faster than you would normally if you were practicing on, say, a platform. It's a little bit weird to think about, but the station has this kind of line going through the axis, and it has I think it's a 0.1 G pull on the edges, and so there's a gradient of gravity between there. So what that means is if you sit stopped at the number like we did before and just release your thrusters, you'll float down naturally. So this is the easiest way to approach landing at first inside of these stations. It's a really good idea to practice this with 0 pips to engines at first because you're going to not overcorrect as much.
Contact. Docking restraints engaged.
Okay, let's see what happens with 4 pips to engines.
Position authorized. Adjust heading for approach to pad 06.
Landing gear deployed.
I'm going to show you just how sensitive drives like this are. This is actually a benefit for us, for flight assist off pilots, because we have more control, but until you get used to it, it can be a little bit overkill. A great thing to do for practice is to just sit here on the pad, hovering above it, practicing how sensitive things are, and really practicing dictating your position on the landing pad, because you're going to be coming in quickly later in your career, really quick, and you're going to want to force your ship onto that pad and be able to dictate your position really quickly. And a final note about these stations, don't let the rotation scare you. It doesn't really apply to us. Rotational correction does nothing with flight assist off. It's a moot control on your board. Let the gravity take care of you, and you'll be fine. Welcome to the gravity training. This is the first of a few gravity training lessons that we do. The Proficiency Level 2, this video, is going to cover low gravity planets. That's what we start with. That's anything 0.3 or lower. At least that's what I consider low gravity, because once you hit 0.4, it starts to feel significantly different, and you have to make a few adjustments. So find a planet that's 0.3 or lower, or conveniently use the one right close to the science station we were just at. These exercises are a lot of fun and surprisingly quite relaxing. So let's get started. You're going to want to locate a ravine for later. Right now we're going to use kind of on the edge of the ravine if you can find a flat spot. As you can see, I'm going to fly a little bit further here to see if we can find a flat spot on the other side. You will find that on all planet surfaces you're going to be using your boost quite a bit. When you boost, remember to factor in your up strafe, your vertical thruster as well, to give you that extra lift that you need if your nose is pointed down. The first thing to do here is to just get comfortable flying along the terrain at a comfortable altitude. It shouldn't take too long. Just keep using your up vertical thruster and you should be fine. As soon as you're comfortable doing that, the next step is to approach the surface, and the goal is going to be to have the terrain analyzer down on our scanner activated. And I want you to try to keep it activated as much as possible. Don't crash, but we're going to try to really stick close to the surface, and that requires us to stick under a certain altitude. Just a friendly reminder that your primary thruster does not need to be activated at this point. It's just dead in the water because you don't need it. Your nose is pointed down, and your vertical thrusters are taking care of your momentum. If you need to redirect, like I am, you might want to use it, but you really don't need to. Your ship is going to keep going with or without the primary thruster. If you notice that the terrain analyzer goes away like it just did for me, just calmly come back down into the altitude that you need to activate it and level out there. Also keep in mind that you don't really need to force yourself down into the planet. The planet will take care of that for you. We'll get back to flat surfaces in a second. Let's go down into the canyon right now and see what we can do. So at this point we want to start pushing our boundaries a little bit because in these valleys, in these crevices, you're not really seeing a lot of flat terrain, which is really good for us because we want to make sure that we have a good idea of our ship dimensions, where the bottom of the ship is, how close we can get to things, and we want to do everything calmly and with minimal inputs. In the next lesson, we're going to do a lot more with isolating thrusters and really trying some different things out as far as using minimal input. But in this lesson, just think about it. Don't let it govern you too much. You'll notice that my throttle goes between 50% to 0 to full, or whatever I need at the time. So just find something comfortable. I just don't want you to have that primary thruster activated the whole time. Once you're more comfortable with the jagged terrain, the peaks and the valleys, and navigating those, I want you to find a feature. So that could be a mountain, a rock, a barnacle, something, and I want you to circle it, and I want you to keep it in your view at all times. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about landing on low gravity planets. It's not too different than what you're used to with the platform. Of course, we have the terrain to deal with. And landing placement with Flight Assist off is incredibly more difficult than with FA on. With FA on, when you get a landing zone,
Landing gear deployed.
you can just drop. With FA off, you have to stabilize yourself, and sometimes those landing zones are so small that they go in and out very quickly. So our approach to this landing that we just did was to just let ourselves drop. We just stabilize ourselves, let that landing zone appear, and make sure that it's there still, and then let ourselves drop, let the planet do the work, just like we did with the station. This relaxed approach will work if you have a really flat area that you're trying to land over. When you're starting out, you're probably going to find that you are having a difficult time making your ship static on the display. So, I mean, you're going to be moving left to right, forward to back. You're going to have a hard time really stabilizing your ship. The key is, if you see a landing zone pop up, push down into the ground like I just did. That way you can find your landing zone, and it might not be the most elegant solution, but at least you're on the ground safe. The next thing that we're going to tackle is a 90-degree nose balance on the surface. So it's not as hard as it seems, or as strange as it might seem based off the title, but what we're going to do is try to keep as close to 90 degrees as we can with our nose pointed down into something. So you're going to identify either a flat surface or a rock or some sort of feature that you can just sit at with your nose pointed directly down. Interestingly enough, as we, in the next lessons, go up in gravity, we're going to see how difficult this exercise becomes. That is because in Elite, you are most efficient, your craft is most efficient near any planet surface when it is parallel to the surface. As you bank and as you pitch your nose up or down, you become less stable. So make sure you're using your attitude indicator to get as close as possible. Don't spend too much time on this exercise. We'll spend a little bit more time on it when we get to higher gravity. There's just a couple last points that I want to make about low-level flying on low-gravity planets, and I wanted to give you a bonus exercise for this video because the last video had a couple in them, and I think people kind of liked them, so I wanted to give you something that was a little bit of a challenge in this video. So one of the points that I wanted to make was, don't be afraid to really severely bank into turns with this low-level flying. Don't be afraid to play around with where your ship is, what it looks like. Don't just go in a straight line necessarily. Play around with the attitude of your ship, the bank of your ship, the roll. And if you see something that's a little different, like this Python here that wants to scan me for my cargo that I don't have, think of it as an opportunity for training. If he wants to scan that badly on you, let's make him work for it. One of the advantages we as human commanders have on planet surfaces is that NPCs don't like to bank because they don't like to destabilize their craft. Of course, that can depend on the ranking of the NPC as well. While we're avoiding this scan from an incredibly slow NPC, let's go ahead and do the bonus exercise as it fits in perfectly here. What is the bonus exercise? I want you to fly upside down. I want you to change your perspective. I want you to fly upside down and do exactly what we were doing before with the skimming exercise. And at all times, or as much as you can, I want you to have that terrain analyzer active. Remember to let the planet do the work on getting you closer to it. Just let it pull you down and then correct it at will. Once that terrain analyzer pops up like it just did for me, try to keep it active. If you look at my throttle, it is completely zeroed out. I'm in careful mode right now. And instead of using that vertical up thruster to maintain my speed, I'm using my vertical down thruster. If you end up losing the terrain analyzer like I just did right there, don't worry about it. Just identify a feature that you can come right back down into and activate it again. And as you can see, he's still trying to scan me. When you get surfaces that are less smooth than what we're dealing with right now, that are more rocky and more mountainous, you can actually use mountains to evade scans quite easily. This is, of course, if you're dealing with an NPC pilot.
Silent running.
Don't be afraid to mix in some other skills that you have as well for this training, like silent running and heat management. Those are great skills to have. Switching components on and off.
Warning. Temperature critical.
The last part of our training for Proficiency 2 deals with sort of a mental state thing and keeping your inspiration going and that fire to keep learning. One of the best ways that you can do that is to do your training with a friend, someone who's on the same level as you, someone that you can talk to and work out problems. Also, it's just a lot of fun. With that in mind, I want to introduce you to Commander Alman, who is a fellow Gambit commander, Newton's Gambit. As I mentioned in the last video, we are a collection of commanders that fly 100% FAOFF. We do have Gambit collaborators also, which switch between the two modes, and they help us with training, and we just all kind of talk about flying flight assist off, what we love. I can't say enough about doing some of these exercises with someone else. It not only helps to push you, it also helps to encourage you to keep doing them and to keep getting better. And that trade-off of this person's better at this skill, this person's better at this skill, etc., that really ends up pushing you and can be a really rewarding experience. It also gives you a really unique perspective on the exercises that you're doing. You get to see them from third person. You get to see and identify possible issues that you might have or that your friend might have, and you get to have that line of communication open. Not only that, but just in viewing someone else do these exercises and keeping up with them and getting into the right angle so you can see what they're doing and report back to them, you're working on your flight assist off skills. You're working on an amazing piece of that flight assist off repertoire that you're building. Because at this point, when you're doing it, you're thinking more about what your friend is doing, or you're thinking more about how you can improve in that exercise when you do it. You're not thinking about the position of your craft. It becomes second nature, which is exactly what you want. I'm going to leave you with my favorite video of this entire week of capturing Commander Alman doing the bonus exercise, upside down, skimming next to the planet, kicking up dust. I want to thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you for all of the great comments that you left on the first video. I'm very inspired to continue working on these, and I'm having a lot of fun. So, I will see you soon. Stay safe out there.